What if the struggles you face aren't flaws to fix, but are messages guiding you to a deeper understanding of yourself? Today's guest is a holistic psychiatrist, New York Times bestselling author, and self proclaimed reclamation queen. She'll share her journey of healing autoimmune challenges and postpartum depression, exploring natural approaches to recovery, the effects of antidepressants, and how reclaiming both body and mind can lead to an authentic and empowered life. This is the story of the reclaimed woman with Dr. Kelly Brogan. Dr. Brogan, so nice to have you on.
Oh, such a pleasure to be here.
When you hear about that word like holistic psychiatrist, it kind
Mhm.
of triggers this, wait a second, how do those two words come together to one? Psychiatry, as most people know it, is kind of looking at the mental and psycho-emotional state and then providing a prescription to address that. Can you talk about your journey? Because obviously you learned the conventional side of it that led you into the holistic side of it.
Yeah, thank you. I would have rolled my eyes at the phrase holistic psychiatrist not too long ago, maybe 15 or 16 years ago. And when I was in my training, so I'm very conventionally trained. In fact, I was inspired to become a psychiatrist because I worked a suicide hotline in college and I volunteered there. And I was so unable to hold the distress of these callers in my literal nervous system
Mhm.
that I remember the feeling of like relief and a sense of safety and arguably control that I enjoyed when I could refer them to the mental health center, when I could refer them to psychiatrists, when I could be sure that somebody was going to medicate them soon and that the problem would be gone. Right. And here I am, and perhaps I helped some folks, but here I am thinking, I'm doing this altruistic thing, philanthropic thing. And when I look back on it, I'm like, wow, that was an early indication of how little tolerance I have for human suffering and how much I needed there to be a quick fix. So I say all of that just to illustrate how much of a believer in the quick fix, in the magic pill I was. And in my training in New York City, I worked on in many different hospitals, one of which was Bellevue Hospital, and there are 13 locked psych wards there. I had a lot of experience, you know, putting people into these spaces against their will and engaging in electroconvulsive therapy and things that the average person on the street would never imagine actually is going on in this moment in highly regarded prestigious hospital centers. So I was a total believer and got very good at polypharmacy, as it's called, which is like prescribing multiple medications at once. And I actually specialized in prescribing to pregnant and breastfeeding women because back in, 2008, 9, there was a burgeoning population of women who were on these meds, thinking about pregnancy or maybe unexpectedly pregnant, and there was no literature, no scientific evidence to suggest whether this was a bad thing or a good thing and what they should do. So I was one of the first 300 to really look at how to I say this like it's like a little snarky but also true. It's like how to scientifically justify continuing to prescribe to these women. That was my
Mhm.
specialty. So I combed the literature and I became aware of the registry. So registry is like if you have a bad outcome, you call the pharmaceutical company and you say this happened. It's a passive reporting system. And at the time that was primarily what we could offer women in terms of reassurance that there wasn't going to be some horrible outcome if they continued taking their meds. So it really wasn't until I was postpartum myself. So this was in my fellowship year where I continued to specialize in this very same population that, reflected my own demographic. And I was diagnosed with my first and only actually medical condition called Hashimoto's thyroiditis. I was diagnosed on a routine physical and I had this experience of cognitive dissonance where I had this like kind of voice come up that said, well, I'm not taking a prescription, like, and I'm certainly not taking one for the rest of my life. Like, where is the escape hatch? I got to get out of here. And of course, that was confusing, right? And potentially hypocritical because I was writing prescriptions every single day for women who were likely to stay on these meds for the rest of their lives. And at least that's what they would be encouraged to do. And so I ended up seeing a naturopath, which was extremely out of character, as you can imagine. And I don't know what, how I felt the hand of God kind of a thing, because it makes no rational sense that I made that choice. It was almost like a secret mission, because I simply didn't want to walk my prescription down to CVS every single month. I wasn't interested in doing that. So fast forward, the space of like 8 to 12 months, and I came off of thyroid hormone. I watched my labs go into the normal range in black and white on paper, and I became, as my daughter, my teenage daughters would say, I was shook because I could not comprehend. So it's like another experience of dissonance. I couldn't comprehend how these simple changes that I had made largely dietarily could possibly have put this otherwise recidivistic illness
Mhm.
into full remission. And you would think I would be like celebrating, right? Like, this is so exciting. I don't even need a prescription anymore. And instead, it began, a pretty archetypal heroine's journey where I was enraged. I felt the betrayal, of the bad mommy daddy. I felt like it was incumbent upon me to exact some sort of remedy.
Mm.
So I took out a $2 million life insurance policy. I collated, what would become thousands of hours of research into my first book, A Mind of Your Own.
Mhm.
And I tapped into a grassroots movement of many, 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 patient advocates, if you want to call them that, who had been, they perceived, wronged by this system that promised them, some sort of amelioration of their symptoms or some sort of treatment. What even is a treatment, right? And what
Mhm.
they experienced instead was maybe worsening symptoms, ongoing symptoms, new symptoms. And I felt aligned with that, message, because I hadn't ever been told that lifestyle mattered, that nutrition mattered. I hadn't ever been told you could put a chronic illness into remission, literally never one time ever. And I certainly had never been introduced to the concept of actually what's in the literature called narrative medicine. It's this idea that your illness actually means something to
Yeah.
your life. It's not a random thing that happens to you. And the materialism that underpins conventional medicine and what I would now refer to as scientism, meaning the belief, almost the religion of science as the defining, nature of reality, it doesn't allow any room, like psychiatrist means a doctor of the soul. I never heard the word soul one time ever in my training. It wasn't a part of what we were looking at. We were looking at this concept of receptors and chemicals. And honestly, most of that is pretty bogus pseudoscience. And I don't use that word lightly. And so that anger really led me to a passionate pursuit of what these symptoms, what a diagnosis could potentially be inviting you toward, right? And how to interact with that. And I, worked with a template of my own healing experience and began to apply that to patients, began to specialize in deprescribing. And when I say specialize, I just mean I did it a lot. There was
Yeah.
nobody to teach me really that I could tap. And I learned mostly from my patients about how to help women come off of these meds that they'd sometimes been on for decades. And that also introduced me to the concept of the dark night of the soul, which of course
Mm.
I never even contemplated. I was very secular. I was actually an atheist most of my, you know, teenage and early 20s years. And so when I began to watch, these women move through these crises with this fierce commitment to never sending them to a hospital, I learned that these crises have a sort of anatomy to them, right? There is a predictable, sequence of stages, and they would come out the other side like a phoenix rising. They would come out the other side with this reclamation energy, this experience of selfhood, this connection to something way bigger than them that now was like fueling their every step. And it became the reason I would wake up every morning. This was, it was my connection really to the divine. It was my connection to what it was that I was here, to support and do, and help me to remember that in the most confusing, disorienting, nihilistic moments of our lives, allowing that to exist, allowing that to simply be, is the necessary. It's a necessary step toward a more expanded definition of who it is that you thought you could be. So the idea is, to answer your question, this concept of holism is really just taking the whole person's experience into consideration. But of course, I never started a patient on medication ever again, not one time ever after 2010. So it's not like I was really practicing as a psychiatrist in that
Right.
sense. Um, and I think the defining ethos that I began to adopt, that I still stand for today, is that your quote unquote healing, right? This idea of healing, it's not my favorite word to use, but that this idea of healing will come when, however it is that you get there. Of course, I have my own, approach and methodologies, but however it is that you get there, it will come when you no longer see as a problem
Yes.
whatever it is that is actually happening to you. And if you're, bleeding rectally, if you're, not sleeping for months on end, if you have brain fog and bloating and hair loss, in the physical arena, this is the deepest work somebody can do, right? Because we experience divorce and death and loss and financial struggles, and you can do the same work with any challenge, of course. But when it comes to the body, the temptation to triangulate against yourself, against your body, is so programmed and conditioned into us
Yes.
that breaking that spell becomes, advanced mastery. It's sorcery almost that you're practicing. Of course, I never spoke in these terms when I was, a clinician, but I really see it on that level. Like, you are playing a very advanced spiritual game, and you're only in the position to do so because you have what it takes to engage it. So it's sort of like, will you?
No, no.
Yeah.
It's always so interesting to hear a doctor's journey into this realm of even spirituality. I mean, most of us know that there is body, mind, spirit. We say these words a lot. We kind of embrace it. There's a little bit of the woo-woo, you could say, in that. Of course, there's science behind it, the biochemical, the PNEI system, right? Consciousness and receptors also, you could say, can tap into all of those elements. But it's almost that when you go into medical school, because my father was a conventionally trained doctor,
Mhm.
anesthesiologist, chief of pain services, you would give all the different epidurals and pain pills and everything. And he witnessed that firsthand, the revolving door, and
Yeah.
also a lack in himself of, I'm not truly helping these people. I'm giving them crutches and band-aids. They're coming back worse and giving more crutches and band-aids. And this isn't what I got into this system for. But I realize also that when you go through the conventional system, you're kind of programmed. This is the way to do it. Don't think outside the box. Put these blinders on over 7 years of medical training, residency, everything else, where you come out the other end, even if you had this idea of holism and believed it inside, your intuition told you there needs to be something more. It's so drilled into you. And it
Yeah.
is difficult for doctors to break free of that because, in a sense, it makes sense that you're taught if someone has depression, antidepressants. That's just logical, right? But
Yeah.
when you dive in deeper and you take off the blinders, you start to see a different picture. And I'd love for you to go into that idea of antidepressants because we were kind of sold, at least I know through the medical side of things and education, that there is a chemical imbalance. That is your problem, has nothing to do with spirit, purpose, anything, traumas. That is it. So it's a very one-to-one connection that you need to be on these SSRI antidepressants. But that's not the case. I know a lot of people are wising up, but still the majority of conventional medicine is very much into here, quick fix is let me give you a prescription for an antidepressant. And you do shift, of course. You feel something when you take this powerful drug. But can you go into that a little bit more of the truth really behind antidepressants and why you kind of moved away from that?
Mm. So when I was moved to question what it is that I was taught because of my experience putting Hashimoto's into remission. Of course, I turned toward the prescriptions that I was writing every single day. And I asked the simple question, have I been told the full story? And it turned out that there were several renegade activists, truth tellers, like Peter Bregan, for example, who had been, sounding this alarm for decades already. And what I was able to access was the existing literature again. So remember, I was not spiritually oriented. I was not interested in theories. I was very practiced at going to pubmed.gov and analyzing a paper. So I walked across a bridge of scientific evidence, from my belief in the chemical imbalance theory and pharmaceutical treatment of so-called mental illness, all the way to the rather polarizing belief that these medications perpetuate that which they purport to resolve. So that's pretty shocking, and the book that actually led me to that conclusion is called Anatomy of an Epidemic. And in that book, there is an analysis of non-industry funded data. So when you learn how to look at data, you want to know things like who paid for this, study what kinds of conflicts of interest, what is being reported in the summary, also known as the abstract, versus like what actually happened in the methodology. So in non-industry funded data, that means that the pharmaceutical industry did not participate in the actual design and implementation of the study. And in this literature, the analysis of this literature concluded that the epidemic of prescribing of psychiatric drugs of all types, but we could just talk about antidepressants. It's really the same story with benzodiazepines, with mood stabilizers, with antipsychotics, that the prescribing and the ever escalating rates of prescription is actually directly correlated with let me say it again, with ever escalating rates of disability, so that when we are drowning in these prescriptions, we are also struggling with, depression being one of the top causes of disability worldwide. Wouldn't those be inversely correlated, right? Like, wouldn't you have more prescribing and less disability? And that's where the actual analysis of the literature, looking at the efficacy of these meds, looking at their undisclosed often, as a prescriber, I was not in a position to disclose this, adverse effects profile and risk profile, right? Leads you to question, like, what are these meds actually doing? And is there scientific evidence for their role in treatment, right? So the concept of a chemical imbalance, or the monoamine hypothesis, as it's sometimes called, is really an assumption. It's a myth, you could even say. It's a notion, it's an idea, it's a concept that for 70 years has not held up to scrutiny, right? So there are many theories about how this got floated, into popular consciousness and into the scientific arena. But regardless, studies on postmortem subjects, studies on cerebrospinal fluid, studies on so-called receptor analysis, studies on people who are depleted in things like tryptophan, which is a precursor to serotonin. Like, they've tried so hard to prove that serotonin, for example, has anything to do with depression, let alone that its absence or deficiency is causal in the manifestation of what we call depression. And the literature has not borne fruit. Okay, so amazingly, people like Joanna Moncrief, as recently as I think it was like 2 years ago, she did a meta-analysis where she looked at everything. She looked at every single study out there, and again came to the same conclusion, that there is no chemical imbalance that we can call depression. Okay, so people are still making this effort. Why are we needing to, more than even one time, debunk this and dismiss this? Why? Because there's an entire industry with vested interest in this theory. Okay, so we are currently anyway, one of 3 countries that allows direct to consumer advertising. So it allows pharmaceutical companies to talk to lay people about their biology, right? So you can learn from a bus stop, poster about your so-called synapses and what's happening with your biochemistry. And it's a very, it's almost like the childlike delight of it being so simple that you could depict it in
Mhm.
little pictures. And also, what I've come to study more and more over the years is the nature of victim consciousness that gets invoked, right? This idea that it's poor me, so sad, no fair. I didn't do it, right? That you get to rest into when you seek out the savior of the system. And the only problem with this is that the villain you're fighting in that triangle is yourself. Right? So you fragment, you split into the part of you that has a very good reason, the best reason, the most benevolent reason for bringing forth what we are calling these symptoms, whether it's fatigue or brain fog or even things like hallucinations, right? The very best reason that actually this is a means, and often an effective one, of keeping you safe in an unsafe world, or at least one that you perceive to be unsafe, right? So you split between that part and then the part of you that says that's bad.
Mhm.
And the part that says that's bad is the self-rejecting part that allies with the system. And so the chemical imbalance theory is a very convenient way not to take responsibility. It's a convenient way to also invoke this wound that I think we're all walking around with, which is there's something wrong with me. I'm damaged, I'm broken, right?
Yes.
If I can see, oh, well, that's what's missing from me. That's what's off about me. It's just my chemistry. I meet a lot of needs, through this approach to my human experience. But if there is no literature suggesting that's actually the case, you know, then what are these medications doing? Well, when I began to research these medications I was prescribing all the time, I found that they actually aren't effective. That's weird because I was prescribing them all the time and lots of women came back, right? And they said, I'll continue this. And yeah, it's helped with this, it's helped with that. I feel less preoccupied with whatever it was that I was focused on. And, maybe I have a little more energy or whatever. So there's, as you suggested, there's often an effect, right? But what actually is this medication doing to relieve the presenting symptoms? And that's where I invoked the research of Irving Kirsch, who is arguably one of the placebo effect experts in the world. And he determined, specifically looking at antidepressants and unearthing some of the locked file drawer data that pharmaceutical companies were hiding through a Freedom of Information Act, he found that these medications are actually not more effective than placebo, and specifically something he called active placebo, right? So if
Mhm.
you've been conditioned by these companies and their advertisements to anticipate side effects, then when you're given a medication that gives you dry mouth or a little indigestion or maybe a headache, something happens inside, like this inner pharmacopoeia, is accessed
Mhm.
where things actually do change. And it's because you believe that you're being treated, right? So the power of placebo effect is never more appreciated and honestly probably better studied than in psychiatry, where
Mhm.
because of the analysis of data that looks at the active placebo effect, that looks at the trials that were used to approve 11 or 12 of the most popular antidepressants, and concludes that what we are calling the effect of these meds is actually the belief that they are effective. Then we're left to consider, okay, well, if it's maybe a little helpful, what's the big deal? Just try it, take the edge off, right? And that's where I encountered the literature on adverse effects that led me to put down my prescription pad forever,
Mhm.
such that I literally, as I mentioned, never started somebody on a med again. And this literature, I mean, it sent a chill, up my spine. It was exposing the propensity that these medications have in a very unpredictable way. So no prescribing doctor is like risk stratifying for maybe it's you. It's a total Russian roulette
Yeah.
of these medications inducing violence towards self and others. right? So the activation, sometimes it's called akathisia. There are several different theories about why some people are affected and others aren't that have to do with metabolism of these drugs. But you can appear even like you're improving. Okay. And what's going on inside of you is a total fragmentation from reality, the reality
Mhm.
that you had lived in. You know, I spoke in London in 2016 with David Carmichael, who murdered his own son, okay, who was 11 years old. And he did so after he was started on a routine antidepressant for work-related stress. Okay, so whatever state he entered into where this made sense to him was not something visible, and no red flags were raised. You know, everybody around him in his life actually thought he was improving. So I didn't need to hear about more than just one, but I was
Mhm.
contacted by many, many, many people who had this experience. Kim Witzak is another lovely woman that I had the privilege of getting to know over the years, whose husband committed suicide in their home after never having had a suicidal thought in his life, after he was started on routine medications, right? So when you look at why these medications are prescribed, and again, if you remember what I was describing about how I felt when I worked that hotline, I obviously understand why it feels good to say, here, I can help you. Here, I have a solution for you. Why don't you just try this, right? But I didn't know about these cases. I didn't know that there was actually published literature suggesting that these medications can cause and induce states of, impulsive violence. And if I had known, I'm not sure what I would have done with that information, right? Because there wasn't really any way to say, well, you're at risk and you're not. So my impression, I haven't prescribed for many years now, decade and a half, but my impression is that to this day, if you go to your primary care doctor and have a 7-minute appointment covered by your insurance, you could be prescribed one of these medications and you too will not know
Mhm.
what awaits you, right? Week 3 or
Mhm.
4, right? And this phenomenon can also emerge in the discontinuation process, right? So the discontinuation process is also extremely, not always, of course, but destabilizing to the system in ways that are very unpredictable and can be, I mean, I could tell you stories. I wouldn't believe it if I didn't see it with my own eyes, what it is to sometimes come off of these meds. I mean, there's nothing that compares. I don't want to hear about OxyContin. I don't want to hear about crack cocaine. Literally nothing compares because it's like whatever these meds are doing to your consciousness
Mhm.
is a relevant dimension of the adaptation that you're making on a soul level, on a psychological level, and then on a biological level. And when all those threads are yanked, and of course, that's why people go very slow in these taper processes, there's a whole new you that has to be born. And that is the dark night of the soul that I referenced. And, you know, if you move through this with, the courage that you obviously have to even consider coming off these meds, there will be a yield, there will be a payoff, there will be a reason that this all makes sense. But that's very hard to access when you're struggling with the literal medical destabilization of the discontinuation of these meds. So I would say those are some of the reasons why I said, you know what, I'm out the game. I am not prescribing these meds anymore, and I am only going to deprescribe them. And in that process of like exposing all of this, I began to learn. You referenced it earlier about like a pretty old at that point uh, system of understanding the body and studying the body called psychoneuroendocrinology, psychoneuroimmunology, and really the connectedness of all of these different arenas of the body, like the gut and the brain, for example. I mean, back in the
Mhm.
day, that was like very radical. I remember before I
Right.
got deplatformed off of Google search, I was like, first page organic results for gut brain because it was that undiscussed, it's that untalked about. Like everybody knows about like sugar highs and everybody knows like, it's probably not a great idea to have like a big gulp soda every day. But the notion that what we are calling serious mental illness could be, potentially driven by exposure to food intolerances or blood sugar instability or micronutrient deficiencies was like very novel, even though in the literature it wasn't, right? So when I went to look, I easily found, like a paper I remember from the New England Journal where it was a woman who was a vegetarian for like 20 something years, and she developed these psychotic symptoms. She was given electroconvulsive therapy, an antidepressant and an antipsychotic before they figured out that she was B12 deficient, and they gave her some B12 by injection in this case, and all of her symptoms were resolved. Like
Mhm.
if that's in the literature, why did I never hear about that? Now, of course, I know why I didn't hear about it, because it's the nature of the system. And,
Right.
after many years of being like a righteous, angry bitch activist, I finally, I finally snapped out of it.
Yeah.
And not entirely, because obviously I get my panties in a bunch about this, but I snapped out of it and I said, oh, right. Like this industry is just a business.
That's
It's
it.
just a business. Okay. And when you go to engage this business, that's what they're selling. Okay. It's like going to a butcher and being like all, righteous that they're not selling a vegan dish. That's not what's for sale there. Right.
No.
So, like, maybe there's not a problem here. Okay. And so that psychology that I referenced earlier, that shift in consciousness to where you're putting so much of your energy into insisting that something be different, you can take it all back in an instant if you can recognize your role, your responsibility, and your choices. And so that's when I
Mhm.
really started to shift my focus into, the inner work that honestly I was in many ways avoiding through my activism. So it's like a meta, phenomenon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, there's a very good case to be made that, through these actions and a pharmacological intervention, we're losing our divinity slowly and surely. We're losing our connection to our even intuition. And a lot of that started with we have a very strong belief system at a very early age. I went to hear Bruce Lipton speak about this, that both most of our belief systems are really ingrained by age 7 or so.
Yeah.
And when you hear your mother, your father, people around you saying, listen to your doctor, listen to, this and that, you have that belief system already ingrained that the doctor is going to tell you. They go through so much schooling and training, they know what to do. But then you look at the pharmacological, the pharma industry, and you start to understand. I have a business background. I understand
Yeah.
fiduciary duty to your shareholders. That's what I was taught
Yes.
over and
Yeah.
over. It's not like help the customer. No, that's very down the line. You have a legal obligation to make as much profit as possible for the people that are investing in you. Millions of people that invest in Johnson and Johnson and Merck and Pfizer, right? And what better way to make money than to keep a lifelong customer that will need more of your product as they take your product
Right.
and have more issues that you need, that the average American is on 4 or more prescriptions. That's just going to go up and up, more shots, more boosters, more everything that bring those profits in. And that's the level of success for them. You being healthy is not successful. You being a well-adjusted, balanced person that is mind, body, spirit, all balanced and well, is not a winning game in that system. And even as we learn this more, as we hear more, I do find that people still latch on to their belief systems. And sometimes there's even, I feel, an element of guilt or shame, which are very low
Yeah.
consciousness levels of, I got duped, right?
Yeah.
I took the shot and now I'm hearing all these, months, years later, it's really bad. And maybe this is the reason I'm feeling this way. Now you talk about reclamation, reclamation queen, all this and that. How do people start to shift away and reclaim their power, their divinity, when they're stuck in shame and guilt, which we know are just low consciousness fields that are very hard to get into a healing state, or at least a state where you move beyond your old belief systems?
Mhm. Yeah. So I have come to see a lot of the human journey, the heroine's journey, the hero's journey as, you know, s- a series of stages that become available when your system has the capacity
Mm,
to work with certain kinds of energies. So that's sort of like an esoteric way of saying that I look through the lens of the nervous system. That's my training. I was a neuroscience major before I was a psychiatrist, and it's a bias that I have, right? Um, we don't understand what the nervous system is. We really don't. And a lot of the biological assumptions that we made, collectively, scientifically, are now not necessarily holding up to scrutiny, right? So the notion that perhaps this system is like an electrical network that allows us to channel and move and interact with our electrical environment, to me is pretty compelling.
Hmm.
And it seems like there are ways that you can order, harmonize, that you can bring resonance to this system. All that I know is that when you focus on grounding, right, that system, when you focus on bringing safety to that system, you have a far greater capacity to work with the energies of shame and guilt, like you're referencing. Because shame, for example, is such a powerful, energetic experience.
Hmm.
Literally, it's literally the energy that you feel in your inner scape, whether it's your heart racing or a sinking feeling, all of the psychological wires that are tripped that say, do anything to stop this, right? There's no witness consciousness. There's no part of you that is interacting with that as, a mother would a newborn, right? There is just a blending with that experience and the fight, flight, freeze, fawn that gets you from the place of feeling a little bit of it to not feeling it at all.
Yes.
Okay, so that defensive structure. So when your system is more grounded, when it is more safe, there's just a little bit of space that gets introduced. And often, it's like it takes a minute or two, right? But you'll eventually get to the place where you can watch yourself defending yourself, trying to prove something, trying to blame somebody, trying to be right about something. All of
Mhm.
these primitive childhood defensive habits, you'll watch yourself do that. And there will come a moment where you have the impulse to do it and you choose not to.
Yes.
And instead, you choose something more playful. You laugh instead. You just turn the other direction. You close the computer instead of writing the shitty email, right? So, that to me, you could look at it through the psychological lens, through the emotional lens. And I have extraordinary colleagues in many arenas, like somatic experiencing, et cetera. There's many paths. But my bias is when your system is stable enough, you can figure it out. You're going to intuitively be led to exactly the modality that's perfect for you to help you build the soft skills of human relationship and feel safe in your body, in your relationships, in the world. And you're going to reclaim what in psychobiology is called neuroception.
Yeah.
So it is the capacity that you have to scan your environment for danger. And when that is informed by your past, by your trauma, by your habits, by your programming, you will perceive danger where there is not danger.
Hmm.
So, right, like I use the example of like if there's a chair in your dimly lit bedroom and you're lying in bed and it's got a pile of laundry on it, you might like, freak
Yeah.
out thinking there's an intruder. It's a pile of laundry. That whole biological response doesn't even make sense because it's not going on in that moment. And of course,
Hmm.
if we were to talk about romance partnership, the opposite also happens where you imagine something extraordinary, you idealize, you project this perfect mommy or daddy onto your partner, and you have a whole experience with them that is not actually grounded in who they are in front of you. Okay. So the reclamation of neuroception allows you to see with what I like to call sober eyes. It allows
Hmm.
you to actually see what the hell is in front of you so that you have enough possession of your system to decide and choose in the moment. Okay. So I found that this requires an initiation.
Hmm.
It requires some transition from your childhood habits to your adult system. So an initiation typically brings you to the brink of your belief in your capacity and pushes you beyond that so that you could imagine, 4 days on a vision quest, I'm probably going to die. And then you don't die. And you have a whole new self concept that has to be born because you didn't die. And now you are the person who didn't die, who had that experience and didn't die. Right. So this initiatory experience has to be elective. I think it has to actually tap into a pre existing field of potentiality, and it has to be like time limited, right? So in my case, in the case of my approach and my program, it's 6 weeks. Okay. So it's a container, right? There's something that you're entering and you know you're going to exit it. And that's psychologically very important, right? Like anybody who's
Mhm.
been through a trial, whether it's childbirth or something else, you want to know, when is it over? Like
Right.
when is it going to be done? And that allows you to give more of your attention, your focus, and your intention to the experience as it's happening. So I found that in this initiatory experience, you show up for yourself and your self-care at a level that you would otherwise make a million excuses not to. And that somehow that focus on yourself, like as if you were that little newborn baby that you were in charge of taking care of, it's almost like, if you want to get into, some of these more trauma-based constructs, it's almost like the good father has shown up inside of you, right?
Right.
It's this energy of, I'm here. It's okay. I've got this. Here's what we're going to do. Okay.
Right.
And when that happens on a psychological level, on a biological level, and again, my protocol, it's like dietary, it's a few minutes of contemplative practice, and it's some detox. This is not like some very elaborate, complex thing. And it doesn't really matter because it has the components that I'm referencing. And it seems to confer to the systems of those who engage this field this shift out of the child-like stress physiology into whatever that safety signal is, whatever that inner okayness is, whatever that like slower, softer, more quiet version of your system allows for you to see now. So sometimes what it allows for you to see is how you've been acting in your marriage. It allows you to see how you've been behaving as a mother. It allows you to see like how you've been betraying yourself, how you've been accepting and settling, how you've been in these habits of self-betrayal and in these habits of compromise and in these habits of self-rejection.
Hmm.
And you actually start to develop the capacity to interest yourself in that rather than defend against, how it is that you are being experienced as wrong and bad. And so that's where, like, after this initiation, the relational work, honestly, most of it is about neutralizing rejection, right? Like rejection of self, rejection of other, and resolving superiority. So in
Yeah.
these, spiritual, psycho emotional efforts, so much more is possible when you have that sound and safe nervous system capacity that allows you not only to own your shit, but also to expand and hold more pleasure. Because I'm one of many, many, many women, who have a habit of expanding into something amazing and then manifesting an accident, manifesting, some sort of like worry, or just creating, like, literally, I'll cook up drama like you can't imagine. I mean, I will literally cook it up out of nowhere because I don't know how to hold pleasure, expansion, joy in my system, sometimes for longer than a few minutes, let alone weeks and months and years. So this process again, I think, is anchored in a system that can allow for the discomfort of some of these states to alchemize, like to transform, transmute.
Yeah, when I hear this, it really does tie back to the central nervous system, right? That balance of it. So often we stay in this highly activated sympathetic response, a state where we are just knee-jerk reactions. Everything's the end of the world. There's always a saber-toothed tiger within a few feet of me, and I can't make the right decisions based off it or even hold that space to take it. What I've learned in speaking to so many people that are, seem so confident and calm isn't that they don't have knee-jerk reactions to information. It's that they're able to pause, be in a balanced state where they're not overly sympathetic, and just take it in, be introspective, and say, is that truly a saber-toothed tiger that I need to start running in fear for my life? Or is that just information that is somewhat benign and I can cope with it better? But as we know that we're living in a state where everything is fear mongering, where we pick up our phone, every ping is something. If you go on social media, it's dramatic. If we go on open, turn on the TV, it's dramatic end of the world type scenarios always. I look at some of my group chats that I try to stay away from with college friends, and it's like, oh my God, did you hear this? It's the end of the world. Like, wow, this is happening. We're on the brink of World War III. And it's just, wow, if I stayed in that, I'd be like always in this nervous state and not able to listen to an intuitive side of me, my heart, my gut so much, and probably make poor decisions and start to over kind of dramatize the life that is truly in front of me. Is that part of what you're doing in Vital Mind Reset, is reestablishing a more balanced state where you're able to take in information without the overwhelming anxiety and everything else that most people feel these days?
So you use the word that I've come upon, which is relaxation.
Mm,
I have these two programs. I have Vital Mind Reset, which for women is called Vital, and then I have this other one based on my last book called Reclaimed.
mhm,
And they go together. And you do one first and then the other to move your way through this process of adulting, really. And the system I decided to call the relaxed woman system.
mhm,
And it's because I began to sensitize to other women's systems out there, right? And I could like stand next to somebody in line at the grocery store, or, a mom at my kid's school, or my own girlfriend, or my own daughter. And I could feel in my system almost like, a little metric, a little litmus of their state. And especially as women, this is, this co-regulation is what we do with infants. It's what your mom was supposed to offer you, okay?
mhm.
Especially in that first year, if not arguably the first 3 years. And as somebody who, went back to work at 3 weeks, I'm certainly not speaking from on high, right? Like having done it the correct way. But regardless, when I would feel inspired or expanded by a woman, when I would feel light, when I would feel playful, it was always because she's more relaxed than me. And so I began to prize that more than the stimulus, the excitement, the drama, and to recognize that I, like so many, I'm addicted, right,
Mhm.
to these spikes in my own system. And like harmonizing, integrating that addiction takes time. It's a process. It's like a practice. But the goal, the place that you arrive at, is that you feel more unbothered, right? You feel more self-possessed. You allow things to be playful instead of resentful and disappointing, or invoking, sort of vigilance or punishment, right? You exit these dynamics that keep you in a highly activated state. And you don't
Mhm.
do that until it's actually more compelling to you to
Right.
taste that relaxation. But from a somatic perspective, it's called titration. You gotta take it a little bit at a time, because otherwise your system will collapse back to the familiar, right? So
Mhm.
maybe you have an unscheduled hour, and instead of scrolling or watching something, you get cozy on the couch and you spend the whole hour asking your body, what is it that you need, right? Do you want me, do I massage my shoulder? Maybe my feet are cold. Maybe I'm thirsty. Maybe I want to go under the blanket, right?
Mhm.
Maybe I want to run my fingers through or brush my hair. And you just ask over and over and over again, what is it that I need right now? This kind of dialogue, beginning to develop a relationship with your own body, requires that you deprogram some very deep shit from childhood. I mean,
Mhm.
we were, most of us, raised in institutional educational facilities, and we were told when we could eat, and we were told when we could pee and poo, and we were told, when we could speak or not, and whether we're good or bad. So in those early formative years, to be programmed to this extent, it's almost amazing to me that we can even change, because
Yeah.
you couldn't design a more malevolent, strategy for, indoctrinating the populace, just to get a little, conspiracy realist
Hmm.
about it. Uh, so that's why, I sometimes talk about, I joke that I call it urinary reclamation, that one of the most powerful things you can do, and I speak as a woman, so I'll give this recommendation specifically to women, uh, is to start to develop a different relationship to how you pee.
Mm.
Okay. So we have a habit as women of prioritizing somebody else's experience of our body over our body. Okay, we do this sexually where we're like performing. We don't even know what it's like to attune to ourselves in bed. We do it in our roles as mother and, employee or CEO or whatever. We are often located outside of ourselves in our attention and our efforts. And biologically, we do this too. And of course, like I mentioned, it's been conditioned in. So instead of saying, I'll be right back. I'm going to go pee quick. I'm just 2 seconds. I'm going to go pee. Right. Instead of saying that, if you're with somebody, of course,
Hmm.
you simply say, I'm going to go to the bathroom. And I challenge any woman listening. This is extremely disruptive to sometimes decades of this habit. And you also prioritize actually going to the bathroom when you have to. So you don't
Yeah.
wait, right? Like in this interview, I'm good now. But if I had to pee at this point in my career, I would say, hey, I'm going to pause for a minute and go. I never, I remember the first time that I ever did that. I was on Luke Story's podcast. It was 3 hours long. And it was the first time I ever said, you know what? My biology matters. And I'm going to go to the damn bathroom. Okay. So you go, you don't offer caveats about how quick you're going to be. And then when you are actually in the bathroom, you tune in to the inbuilt pleasure of moving from the discomfort of having to pee to the relief of having peed. In your body are all sorts of pleasurable experiences. I could literally run my nails up my arm and get goosebumps at how like intense that sensation is, right? So you do this practice and it is a part of how you can reclaim your biology and start a trustworthy dialogue with your own body. Because if you're bringing to bear that tyrannical, you do what I say, and that, it's like you're acting like a pimp to yourself, right? Just whoring yourself out in terms of your needs based on any relationship that's in front of you, it's going to be impossible for you to access the magic of this vessel, which is the intuitive yes and the intuitive no, right? You won't ever have to make a decision again. Literally. No pros and cons list, no nothing, no doubts, no I got to talk to 10 people. You will literally just feel, yep, nope. And you'll go through your entire life with that navigational compass restored. To me, I'm not sure there's a superpower. I'm more interested in that than that. So if it comes through these small little efforts, these small little commitments to care, about your biology, about getting back in harmony with your own needs, then it's a good place to start, right? Because you can get to the, healing your lineage, and I'm very interested in all those things, trust me. But you can get to that and it will come naturally. It will unfold. It's not going to be a will-based thing where you're, putting it on your to-do list. It's just going to be a part of putting one foot in front of the other and trusting your own process.
It's so interesting you bring that up on the urinary side of things and you're because I was literally having a talk with a friend who's a DO, an acupuncturist, about a patient I knew or somebody, and they were having problems with their kidneys and urinating and everything. And he's like, kidneys are kindness. You need to be kind to yourself. Every single cell is listening to your thoughts. If you have that thought of, I can't go to the bathroom or this and that, I can't leave the situation and do that, your body picks up on it and it starts to react to that. So you have to understand that you have to be kind to yourself. Your cells are always speaking and listening. And that's why you ask questions and you get things in return from it. And it is true. You have to reframe kind of the way you go about things instead of this shameful or it's only going to be a second, sorry, I'm burdening you, to this is a beautiful detoxification process. This is cleansing my inside to become healthier and more free and purified, right? When you shift just that little thing, everything starts to shift. So it's a beautiful, beautiful analogy. And that's so funny you brought that up. Now, Dr. Brogan, I want to be conscious of your time here, but I also want to talk to you about everything that's shifting politically and going on right now. You were part of the disinformation dozen that was blocked, and love that name. It's the Dirty Dozen, different,
The dirty dozen.
and now you have, RFK Jr. in line to be part of that, the Maha movement. What are your feelings on that? Do you think we're going into a real changing time where health will be kind of brought to the forefront, will be shifted, or is this more of pandering? What are your feelings?
Mm-mm. Oh, wow. So I guess the simplest way to summarize my feelings on it is that I've unsubscribed from
Hmm.
everything that is going on the world stage. When I started to really appreciate the role of mass media in manipulating and influencing and uh, really rolling out these psychological operations, I understood that there's always a dialectic, right? There's two sides, right? And I often, of course, found myself in the resistance side of things, and that's how early on in 2020, I ended up making that illustrious list of actually, honestly, pretty arbitrary names, but regardless, and it took a lot for me to unhook.
Hmm.
It took many deep personal changes. It took a lot of inner work. It took a lot of getting very real about how it is that I actually embody that which I judge, right? So again, this sense of superiority, this sense of certainty, this rather immature perspective that I held, that I know exactly how reality should be, not only for me, but for everybody. And that's what also started to interest me in things like voluntarism and, anarchy and looking at whether or not we actually need government, right? Like, am I really waiting for the good daddy hero, to come home and save me? Or is all of that inner reparenting that I've done to get me to this more sovereign place where I am okay, literally no matter what, and I trust myself to source exactly what it is that I need. So as I began to reclaim my energy from the dialectic of, health freedom fighting and activism, I really it was extremely humbling to witness all of the ways that I was participating in the same energetic signature as that which I was fighting. And I didn't really have to go farther. And I have a whole masterclass on disclosing all of the uncomfortable truths about the shadow of activism. But I
Mm.
really didn't have to go farther than my daughter telling me one day, "Mama, you're so afraid of so many things."
Oh, wow.
And here I am thinking I'm like freaking like Joan of Arc, like I'm like, what? But from her perspective, it's like the EMFs and the GMOs and the pesticides and the
True.
gulags we're going to be thrown into and forcibly injected. Like that whole it's energetic, right? So the place that I was in was my body is fragile. There's bad things out there and I need to fight them into submission. I need to even punish, right? So that kind of activism actually has a lot of villainy.
Yeah.
In many points in my activism career, I was out for blood. I wasn't going to be happy until, the industry was crippled, and people were, out of work forever, kind of a thing in my efforts to expose the truth about pharma. And I'm not suggesting that there isn't a role for activism. I'm not suggesting anybody should look deeper into what political partisanship is all about and who are these actors and all this stuff. I'm not suggesting any of it. It's not my business what anybody else is up to. I just know for me, I got to the place where that aligning with these concepts of heroes out there, right, was keeping me infantilized. It was keeping me in a more immature, childlike state. So I'm completely apolitical. I do not vote. I haven't for some time. And in fact, I'm in a community of folks who, orient towards the government very differently and
Mhm.
operate very differently and have investigated some of the commercial underpinnings of what it is, that we call our birth certificates and what actually goes on when we get these licenses, like my medical license, for example, that kind of thing. And I love that approach too, because it's like there are all these commercial remedies available where you no longer participate in the system the way that you used to, where you thought you had to like fight not to pay taxes because you shouldn't have to, and bad government is taking your money, whatever. Like for me, I was kept in a petulant, rebellious energy that was not serving my maturation as a woman. So unsubscribing entirely has really liberated me to focus on what's actually in front of me. Okay.
Mhm.
Making sure that my actual relationships, my actual choices are of the highest integrity possible. And trust me, that is a full-time job. Okay. Like
Yeah.
for me to distract myself with whatever is going on with the anonymous victim out there. And again, I did this for over a decade. Whatever is going on in the mass media, for me to distract myself with that would at my stage be an avoidance tactic,
Mm.
so that I didn't have to look at the uncomfortable conversation, to have with my daughter, or the leap of faith I have to make in my business, or whatever it is that refines me as an emotional adult and offers me more mastery over the domain of my responsibility, which is myself. Period.
That's right. I mean, it's a very empowering message because you are the solution. No one else out there is. You are the solution, and you have the ability to unsubscribe. We forget that. If we don't like emails, we know we unsubscribe,
Exactly.
right? Even though we all have too many emails, we should probably use the unsubscribe button more. But we have that in life too. You have the option,
We do.
right? And that's empowering as well. So thank you for sharing that message as our final one. Where can people learn more about you? Get into the courses, read the books.
Yeah. So I'm over at kellybroganmd.com, and yeah, this system of resources is available. And then I have a bunch of books that I've published, including a kid's book that I published with my daughter called A Time for Rain. And those are all available in the usual spots. And thank you. This is such an enjoyable conversation.
This was great. Thank you so much for your work. Continue to put it out there into the world. And thank you for being on the show. And if you're listening, be sure to visit Dr. Brogan's website, follow her on Instagram and Twitter, all under the name Kelly Brogan MD. And until next time, continue writing your own healing story.